The rain came down hard on the metal roof of the old bunker. Jacob sat near the fire, sharpening a small hunting knife. The flames danced in the quiet, throwing shadows across the rough concrete walls. Outside, the night was cold and black. No one ever came this far out, not since the war ended. He liked it that way. No soldiers, no neighbors. No questions, just the wind, the dirt, and the silence. Jacob had buried too many memories to let anyone dig them up again. But then, knock, knock, knock. Jacob froze. 3 soft knocks echoed through the steel door. He stood slowly, every muscle tight. Nobody ever knocked, not out here. He reached for his rifle, loaded it, and stepped toward the entrance. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough from years of quiet. No answer, just another knock. Softer this time. He opened the small slit in the door, his breath fogging the glass. Outside stood a figure, wrapped in soaked cloth. Rain dripped from her hood. Beside, her 2 small shadows trembled. "We need shelter," the woman said in a weak voice. Her accent was alien, but her words were clear. "Please, my children, they're cold." Jacob stared at her. He knew what she was. Blue skin, silver eyes, faint glowing marks on her cheeks. A widow of the Zalari race, one of the enemy. The war was over, yes, but trust was not. She shouldn't be here. She should be in a refugee camp, or dead. Still, something stopped him from closing the slit. The children. They weren't more than 5 or 6 years old. They clung to her legs, shivering in the rain, their eyes wide with fear. One night, Jacob muttered to himself. He hated himself for what he was about to do. He opened the door, rifle still, in hand. The woman stepped inside slowly, her head bowed low. The children followed, wet feet leaving tiny puddles on the floor. "I'm Vera," she said, kneeling down suddenly. She kept her eyes low, her voice shaking. "If you let us stay, I will cook clean or do whatever you want." She placed her hand on her chest, bowing again. "Just don't send us away." Jacob didn't speak. He just stared at her. Not as an enemy, but as a mother, a broken mother, offering herself like a tool. The boy was coughing now. The girl clutched her soaked scarf. "Get near the fire," Jacob said, finally pointing. He walked over, dropped a blanket by the flames. The woman and her children sat close. Warming their hands, steam rose from their wet clothes. Jacob tossed them a loaf of bread, then sat across the room, watching. The girl chewed slowly, as if she wasn't sure it was real. The boy held a piece tightly, not eating, just staring at it. Jacob remembered that look. He'd seen it on orphaned human kids during the war. It was the look of someone waiting for food to be taken away. "I don't want anything from you," Jacob said sharply. Vera looked up, confused. "You don't have to offer yourself to stay here," he added. "Just don't steal and don't lie." Vera nodded slowly, her eyes watering. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked like she hadn't said those words in years. The fire crackled as silence returned. Jacob leaned back in his chair. Rifle, still close, but his grip relaxed. The children had curled up beside their mother, already half asleep. Vera pulled the blanket over them gently, then looked toward Jacob. "Why did you open the door?" she asked softly. Jacob didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, lost in his own ghosts. "Because no one opened the door for me," he said at last. Vera said nothing, but her eyes filled with tears. She placed her hand over her chest. Again, not in fear this time, but in quiet respect. Outside, the storm grew louder. But inside the bunker, something had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was full, with breath, warmth, and the soft sound of children sleeping. The sun rose slowly over the dry hills, painting the sky with soft orange light. Inside the bunker, the fire had burned low, but warmth still lingered. Jacob sat at the table, staring at the 3 figures curled up near the hearth. The woman hadn't moved all night. She had stayed awake, arms wrapped tightly around her children. Her eyes barely closed, always watching, always alert. She was used to danger. Jacob could see that now. He cleared his throat quietly. The woman flinched, then sat up fast, pulling her children closer. "It's morning," Jacob said, not unkindly. "You hungry?" The boy opened his eyes first, rubbing them with his tiny hands. The girl followed, blinking at the morning light seeping through a small crack in the ceiling. Vera looked at Jacob and nodded once. "Yes, thank you," she whispered. He brought over more bread and heated broth. The children ate slowly but with big eyes, stealing glances at Jacob like he was some kind of giant. Jacob poured tea into a tin mug and pushed it toward the woman. She hesitated before taking it, both hands shaking slightly. "What's your name?" Jacob asked, voice low. She looked surprised, like she hadn't heard that question in years. She opened her mouth, then paused, confused. "My name..." It was Vera, she said finally. "Was?" Jacob asked. She looked down. "My owners called me something else," she said softly. "I forgot it, but my mother called me Vera. Before. That word hung in the air like smoke. Before the war. Before the ships came. Before the burning of cities." Jacob didn't press her. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Vera," he repeated, making sure to say it clearly. "It's a good name." She looked up and gave the smallest smile, like she had forgotten how. Jacob reached down and took something from a shelf, a wooden carving of a dog. He handed it to the little girl, who looked at him with big, uncertain eyes. "It doesn't bite," he said. The girl smiled just a little and held the toy close. The boy stared at the food on the table. He reached out carefully, as if expecting someone to slap his hand. Jacob pushed the bowl closer to him. "No one's taking it," he said firmly. "Eat." Vera wiped her eyes quickly before her children could see her cry. "You're kind," she said to Jacob. He shook his head. "I'm just not a monster," he muttered. Later, Vera started cleaning without being asked. She wiped the floor, folded the old blankets, even swept the ashes from the fireplace. Jacob watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to," she replied. "I don't like feeling useless." Jacob didn't argue. He knew that feeling too. Well, feeling useless was worse than feeling pain. As the children played with old tools and bits of wire near the corner, Vera sat with Jacob at the table. He poured 2 cups of water and passed one to her. "You said your owners called you." "Something else," he said. She nodded. "Property 971, she said quietly. "That's what the collar said before I broke it off." Jacob clenched his jaw. The war might be over, but its cruelty still lived in memories like hers. "Not here," he said. "You're Vera, and they're just kids, not numbers." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "I don't deserve it." Jacob looked out the window, the sky now fully lit. "I was a soldier," he said at last. "I did things I can't fix, but maybe I can make something right now." Vera placed her hand on the table slowly, not touching his, but close. "Then maybe I can too," she whispered. They sat in silence for a moment. The children's laughter was soft, almost musical, a rare sound in a place that had known too much silence. "Do they speak?" Jacob asked. "Not much," Vera replied. "The girl, Nyla, talks in whispers. The boy, Caro, hasn't said a word since we escaped." Jacob nodded. "They'll talk when they feel safe," he said. "Give it time." That night, Vera cooked for the first time. She used wild herbs and roots she had collected near the river. The smell was rich and strange, but pleasant. Jacob tasted it carefully, then raised an eyebrow. "Not bad," he said. Vera smiled again, a little wider this time. "It was my mother's recipe," she said. "She said food made people feel at home." Jacob looked at the children curled up by the fire, their bellies full. Maybe, just maybe, this place could become more than a bunker. Maybe it could become something, like a home, even if just for a while. The days grew warmer as spring slowly reached the far edges of the colony world. Jacob's farm, quiet and forgotten by most, began to stir with new life. The once silent bunker now echoed with small footsteps and soft giggles. It was strange. Jacob thought, how fast a place could change when it had laughter inside. The girl, Nyla, had taken a liking to Jacob's old dog, Rust. The animal was big, shaggy, and lazy, until Nyla came running with a stick. Rust barked once and chased it every time, his tail wagging like he was young again. Nyla would laugh, the sound light and pure, and it made something deep in Jacob's chest ache. She was smiling now, really smiling, not just with her lips, but with her eyes too. Jacob noticed it first during breakfast when she quietly placed a flower on his plate. He looked at her in surprise, and she just gave a little nod before running back to her mother. He kept the flower, pressing it between two old pages of his notebook. Caro, the boy, was quieter, but different now. He still didn't speak, but he watched everything. Especially Jacob. One morning while Jacob was planting early crops, he noticed Caro standing nearby. The boy stared at the shovel, then at Jacob, then stepped forward without saying a word. Jacob handed him the smaller spade. Caro took it carefully, holding it like it was something important, side by side. They dug little rows into the dry earth. Not a single word was spoken, but something passed between them. A silent bond of work, of trust. Vera stood on the porch, her arms crossed gently over her chest. Her long blue dress fluttered in the wind as she watched her children come alive again. Her eyes glistened, but this time, it wasn't sadness. It was relief, maybe, even hope. Later that day, Jacob found her hanging small strips of colored fabric outside the bunker. "What's that?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Memory cloth," Vera answered softly. "On my planet, when someone begins again, we hang cloth in the wind so the past can blow away." She tied one for each of her children, and then one for herself. When she reached for a fifth strip, she paused, looked at Jacob, and tied it anyway. Jacob didn't ask who it was for. He had his guesses. We all leave something behind when we start again. At night, they gathered by the fire, just like before. But now Nyla would sometimes crawl into Jacob's lap. Caro would sit closer too, holding the wooden dog Jacob gave them. Vera would hum soft lullabies in her alien tongue, her voice gentle and warm. One evening, Jacob brought out an old harmonica he hadn't touched in years. He played a slow, broken tune, rough but full of heart. Nyla clapped, and even Caro tapped his fingers on the floor. Vera smiled wide, placing her hand on her heart. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It was rusty," Jacob said, chuckling. "But the audience didn't run away, so I'll count it as a win." Another day, Nyla and Caro found an old metal pot in the storage room. They filled it with pebbles and turned it into a cooking pot for their pretend kitchen. Jacob watched as Vera joined their game, kneeling in the dirt, pretending to taste their soup. She made silly faces, pretending it was too spicy, and the children laughed until they fell over. Jacob had never heard that sound inside his bunker before, and now he never wanted it to stop. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Caro did something unexpected. He reached out and tugged gently on Jacob's sleeve. Jacob looked down, surprised. Caro pointed to the top of the hill and then to himself, then to Jacob. "You want me to come with you?" Jacob asked. The boy nodded, just once. They climbed the hill slowly, the wind brushing through the tall grass. At the top, Caro stood still for a moment, then pointed to the horizon. A flock of birds flew across the orange sky, and the valley below shimmered with evening light. Jacob placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No one's chasing you now," he said quietly. "You're safe here." Caro didn't reply, but he leaned against Jacob's side, just for a second. That was enough. That single moment said more than any words could. When they returned, Vera had made dinner from roots and dried meat. As they ate, Nyla leaned over and whispered something to her mother. Vera's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "What did she say?" Jacob asked. Vera wiped her eyes and smiled. "She called you Papa," she said softly. Jacob's hands froze on the table. He looked at Nyla, and she gave him a shy smile before stuffing bread in her mouth. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and kept eating. But inside his heart felt something he hadn't felt in years, not since before the war, not since before everything changed. The next few days passed quietly. Jacob worked the fields with Caro by his side. Nyla followed Rust around the yard, tying flowers to his tail. Vera did the washing near the creek, humming softly as she worked. But even with all the peace around them, Jacob knew something was still wrong. Vera moved carefully like she was hiding pain. She smiled, yes. But it was a thin smile, stretched over old wounds. One morning, while lifting a heavy bucket of water, Vera stumbled. She dropped the bucket and winced, grabbing her leg. Jacob rushed over. "You're hurt," he said firmly. She tried to stand, but failed. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice was tight. Her eyes told the truth. Without asking, Jacob helped her inside the bunker. He made her sit on the old cot and rolled up the side of her dress. What he saw made his stomach twist. Her leg was bruised, the skin rough and burned. Old scars crossed over newer ones like a map of pain. One large scar ran from her ankle to her thigh, thick and ugly. It looked like it had once been chained. What did they do to you?" Jacob asked quietly. Vera didn't answer at first. She looked away, staring at the cold stone wall. Then, in a voice as soft as wind, she began. "They took me from my village," she said. "I was healing a child when the soldiers came. They called us rebels even though we had no weapons. They branded me," she pointed to her shoulder. "They made me a servant." Jacob sat still, not interrupting. Vera kept talking. "They gave me a number," she said. "Property 971. They sold me between camps, made me cook, clean, sleep on floors." Her hands shook now. "If I made a sound, I was punished. If I cried, they burned me." She lifted the side of her shirt and showed him a mark, a number burned into her skin, dark and cruel. Jacob turned away, ashamed. He had fought in that war. He didn't do those things, but others did, and he never stopped them. "I ran when the bombing started," Vera said. "They forgot we were locked inside. I broke the cage door with a metal rod, took my children and ran for the mountains. For weeks we ate bugs, leaves, anything we could find." Her voice cracked. "I thought we'd die," she whispered, "but we kept walking until we saw your lights." Jacob stood up slowly and walked to the fire. He stared at the flames, his fists clenched. "I'm sorry," he said after a long silence. "I can't change what was done to you. But I can promise this, no one will ever touch you again." Vera looked at him, her eyes glassy but strong. "I believe you," she said. And for the first time, she let herself cry, not silent tears, but deep sobs that came from the soul. Jacob didn't speak. He simply sat beside her and let her lean on his shoulder. Not as a soldier or a rescuer, but as a man trying to carry someone else's pain. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Vera cooked a new meal. She used purple roots and herbs Jacob had never seen before. When he took a bite, his eyebrows rose. "What is this?" he asked. Vera smiled gently. "Zilari comfort stew," she said. "My mother made it when someone was broken." Jacob didn't speak. He just kept eating, slowly, like every spoonful healed something inside. After dinner, Vera stepped outside. To hang laundry, Jacob watched through the window as she moved with care, her limp still there. But something in her posture had changed. She stood a little straighter now, not fully healed but no longer hiding. The children were asleep early that night, curled up together on the mattress. Jacob sat at the table with a mug of warm tea. Vera joined him, her hair still wet from the evening air. "Do you still see them?" she asked. Jacob looked up, confused. "The men you fought," she clarified. "In your dreams?" Jacob nodded slowly. "Every night," he admitted. "Sometimes I see their faces. Sometimes I hear the screams." He took a long breath. But then I wake up and I hear Caro breathing. I hear Nyla giggle in her sleep. And I remember I'm not that man anymore. Vera smiled, small but honest. Then maybe we can heal together, she said. Jacob raised his mug. To healing, he said. She lifted her cup too. To finding peace where there was none. Outside, the stars blinked across the sky, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt something he thought was gone. Hope. Jacob had just finished fixing the water pump behind the barn when he heard the sound. It started low, like thunder far away. But then it grew louder, closer. Not thunder, engines, heavy ones. He dropped his tools and stepped outside, squinting, up at the sky. A patrol cruiser, gray and marked with the logo of the Human Colony Authority. It flew slow and low, scanning the land with blinking lights. It circled once, then landed near the edge of Jacob's fields. His heart sank. He hadn't seen one of those in over 2 years, and he knew they didn't land just to say hello. Vera rushed out from the bunker, eyes wide, children behind her. Jacob held up a hand. To stop her. Get back inside, he said, voice tight. Take the kids into the cellar. She hesitated for only a second before grabbing Caro and Nyla's hands and pulling them toward the hatch hidden beneath the pantry. Jacob took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his hands, and walked toward the landing site. The cruisers. Doors hissed open and 2 officers stepped out. Their uniforms were sharp, their expressions cold. One of them, a tall man with a clean-cut beard, raised his tablet. Jacob Ward? He asked. That's me, Jacob replied, keeping his tone flat. Something wrong? Routine check, the man said, glancing at his scanner. We received reports of unauthorized alien movement near this region. Jacob's jaw tightened. There's nothing out here but dirt and rust, he said. You're wasting your time. The officer looked around, eyes sharp. You live alone? Jacob nodded. Always have, he lied. The other officer walked toward the bunker, slow but alert. Jacob's pulse picked up. He forced himself to stay calm. Mind if we look inside? The first officer asked. I do mind, Jacob said. You've got no warrant and I've got no reason to let you. The officer smirked. You hiding something? Just my peace and quiet, Jacob replied. Now if you're done playing soldier, you can head back to your shiny cruiser. The officer held Jacob's gaze for a moment. Then he tapped his tablet and turned away. Fine, he said. No. Signs of movement out here anyway. The second officer rejoined him, but not before taking one last long look at the bunker. They boarded the cruiser and lifted off, dust and wind kicking up around Jacob as they flew away. He didn't breathe, until the sound was completely gone. Then he ran, straight to the bunker, straight to the cellar. He opened the hatch, and Vera looked up from the dark, holding both children tightly. They're gone, Jacob said. You can come out. Vera climbed up, her hands shaking. Caro clung to her leg. Nyla's eyes were wide with fear. I thought they'd take us, Vera whispered. Jacob looked her in the eye. I won't let that happen, he said. Not now. Not ever. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He sat at the table, staring at the old radio. It still worked, barely. He switched to a private channel and sent out a message calling Samuel Briggs, he said into the mic. If you're still out there, I need a favor. He waited, unsure if anyone would even respond. Then, crackle, a voice rough and familiar. Jacob, it's been years, what do you want? Papers, Jacob said. Real ones. Colony-grade IDs, refugee clearance. There was silence on the other end. Who's the ghost? Samuel finally asked. Widow, Jacob said. 2 kids. They've been through hell. More silence, then a sigh. Fine, Samuel replied. But this makes us even. More than even, Jacob said, and ended the call. The next morning, Jacob handed Vera a piece of paper with a list of names. These will be your new names when the documents come, he said. You'll be legal, protected. Vera looked at the names, her fingers brushing over them like they were. Gold, you did this for us? She asked. Jacob nodded. You're not ghosts anymore. Vera stepped forward, tears in her eyes. She reached for his hand and held it tight. "We can never repay you," she whispered. "You already have," Jacob said. "You gave me back my life." Outside, the wind blew gently through the cloth strips tied near the porch. Each one told a silent story, of survival, of loss, and now, of new beginnings. The fake identity papers arrived 2 days later. Samuel Briggs had delivered them through a merchant shuttle that stopped once a month at the trade post 40 kilometers east. Jacob brought them back wrapped in cloth, hidden in a basket of tools. Vera unwrapped them with trembling hands. Inside were 3 shiny ID cards, each with a new name and a small photo. She ran her fingers over the card that read, Vera Callan, registered civilian refugee. The others were for Nyla and Caro. Tears filled her eyes before she could even speak. Jacob stood nearby, pretending not to notice. He didn't like to watch people cry. It made something twist inside his chest, something he couldn't fix with tools or silence. "These are real," Vera whispered. Jacob nodded. "You're legal now," he said. "You won't be hunted. Not here." Vera sank into the chair, holding the cards close to her chest. Her children climbed onto her lap, Nyla giggling as she saw her picture. Is this forever?" Vera asked, still unsure if she should believe it. Jacob looked her in the eyes. "As long as you want it to be," he said. "This place is yours too now." That night, while the children slept near the fire, Vera sat beside Jacob at the table. The oil lamp cast a soft glow across the room. She wore a simple woven dress, her long silver hair falling loose for the first time. There was something different about her now, something calm, something safe. She leaned forward, placing her hand gently over Jacob's. "You saved us," she said. "You could have turned us away, but you didn't." Jacob didn't pull away, he just nodded. "You didn't deserve what happened to you," he said. "And the kids. They deserve a chance." Vera hesitated, then spoke slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's one thing more," she said. "I want to stay here, not just as a guest. I want to belong to this place. To you." Jacob froze. He met her eyes, and in them he saw something raw, not fear, not survival, but choice. "I don't need payment," Jacob said carefully. "I never wanted anything from you." Vera shook her head. "This isn't payment," she said. "This is my choice. I was forced to give myself before to monsters, but this time, I'm offering my heart." Silence filled the room like fog. Jacob looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up and held hers. "I don't know how to be anything but broken," he said. She smiled softly. "Then we'll be broken, together." The next morning, Nyla and Caro ran outside laughing. Rust barked as they chased him around the garden. Jacob stood beside Vera, watching the sunrise from the porch. Vera slipped her hand into his again. This time it stayed there. Later, she helped him build a new greenhouse from leftover metal and glass panels. Caro handed them tools. Nyla handed them nails. The family worked together under the sun, their skin glowing with sweat and warmth. When it was done, Vera stood inside the frame and spun around, laughing. "It feels like something new," she said. Jacob smiled. "It is." He said that night the children made Jacob a surprise. They took colored leaves and wildflowers and with Vera's help, made a small crown. They placed it on Jacob's head while he was reading an old manual. "You're king now," Nyla said proudly. Jacob laughed harder than he had in years. "Papa King," Caro whispered, his first word in months. Everyone froze. Jacob looked at him in shock. Caro smiled shyly and repeated, "Papa." Vera gasped and covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. Jacob placed his hand gently on the boy's head. "I'm right here," he said. "Always." That night, they sat around the fire again, not as strangers, not as survivors, but as something new. A family. And when Vera leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there, feeling the warmth of something he never thought he'd have again. Home. The seasons shifted. Spring melted into summer and the valley around Jacob's farm bloomed like it hadn't in years. Wildflowers danced in the breeze, bees buzzed lazily, and the once-forgotten land now pulsed with quiet life. So did the people who lived on it. Jacob's bunker no longer looked like a place of survival. It looked like a home. The porch had hand-carved railings now thanks to Caro's silent curiosity and Jacob's patient teaching. The roof held colorful cloths fluttering in the wind. Zilari. Memory flags Vera had tied with care, one for her past and one for her future. Inside, the shelves were filled with more than tools and spare wires. There were drawings Nyla made of stars and animals. There were books Jacob read to the children, slowly and with a quiet voice. There were dried herbs Vera hung near the fire, just like her mother once did. Everything had changed, yet everything felt right. That morning, a small delivery drone dropped off a packet near the gate. Jacob opened it carefully. Inside was a formal certificate, stamped and sealed. It confirmed Vera, Nyla, and Caro as recognized citizens of the colony. No longer undocumented, no longer at risk of removal. They were legal. They were safe. Jacob brought it inside and laid it on the table. Vera stared at it with wide eyes. She traced her name with her finger, slowly, gently, then looked up at Jacob. "This paper means more than just safety," she said. "It means we exist." Caro and Nyla didn't fully understand, but they saw their mother cry happy tears, and they hugged her tightly. That was enough for them. Later that week, Vera did something she hadn't done since before. The war. She danced. It happened on a quiet evening. Jacob had played a tune on his harmonica, soft and slow. Nyla clapped her hands, urging him to play faster. So he did. Vera stood up, laughing softly, and spun in the dirt outside the bunker. Her long silver hair caught the wind. Her glowing patterns shimmered in the fading light. Caro joined in, hopping clumsily on one foot, then the other. Nyla pulled Rust into the circle, wrapping flowers. Around his neck, Jacob watched it all from the porch. His hands rested on his knees, but his heart felt full. That night, after the children were asleep, Vera sat beside Jacob under the stars. The two of them shared a blanket, their shoulders touching. Vera looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to dream about a place like this," she said. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, where I could grow old with my children." Jacob turned toward her. "And now?" he asked. "Now I have it," she replied. "But I want one more thing." She reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a thin string with 2 rings, one Zilari, the other human. She handed one to Jacob. "Not because I have to," she said, "but because I want to. I want to be yours, not as payment, not as protection, but as a partner." Jacob took the ring and stared at it for a long moment. Then he slid it onto his finger and smiled. "Then I'm yours too," he said. "No conditions, no debts." The next morning, the family stood together near the greenhouse. The children helped plant new crops, native vegetables mixed with Zilari herbs. It was Vera's idea. "New soil, new roots," she said. "A place where both our worlds grow together." Nyla tied a cloth around a small wooden post near the edge of the farm. On it, she had written in careful letters, "Home of the Callan family." Later, Jacob carved a plaque to place beneath it. It simply said, "Belonging is not given, it is built, together." That night, as stars filled the sky, Vera rested her head on Jacob's chest. The children snored softly beside the fire, Rust curled, up near their feet, tail flicking. The wind whispered through the memory cloths, carrying away the pain of the past. Jacob closed his eyes. His hand rested over Vera's, and in that moment, he knew. They were not broken anymore. They were whole.